Well, Sylvain, thank you for joining. Where are you coming in from today?
Hi, Brendan. I'm still very much sitting at home in the suburbs of Montreal, up north. So,
I,
been here for a year or a lifetime, it seems.
I feel like we've only gotten to know each other over Zoom, and
I
only
know.
now I just noticed the Mario Lemieux jersey in your background. That's impressive.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I am Canadian, right? So hockey is I mean, it's a religion here, and Mario Lemieux is a Montrealer. So even though he played in the States, still very much stayed a Canadian a citizen and did great at the Olympics in Salt Lake City. So yeah, that's one of the my favorite piece. So
Nice. Well, Sylvain, maybe can you start by just telling everyone kind of the background of Ivanhoé Cambridge, and in particular your role, which has evolved, I think, in a really unique way at Ivanhoé Cambridge.
sure. So quickly, Ivanhoé Cambridge is the real estate arm of the Caisse de Dépôt, which is very large pension fund that manages public pension monies and has about in US, I'll round it up to 300 billion US dollars, and real estate is about 12% of that. And traditionally, Ivanhoe Cambridge was invested solely in office and retail, and maybe 10 years ago went into multifamily, 5 years ago into logistics. So, and we're continuing to grow these last couple of asset classes. Obviously, the first two are very much under disruption, and so it's very special times for real estate, and we'll come back to that, I'm sure, later. My role as a chief investment and innovation officer is to try to bridge, I guess, those two words together. We like more and more to invest in innovation, and what we're doing with you is definitely an example. And hopefully, we innovate in investments, in the way we invest, in what we invest, and I think one cannot go without the other. So I think to second guess yourself all the time, and to try to better understand social behavior is key, right? And this past year has proven the importance of that.
And I think it's so interesting that obviously those two job titles on, being chief investment officer, but also chief innovation officer, I've actually just never seen that done. I totally appreciate the logic of doing it. I just think it's very unique for a real estate company to have that kind of very tech forward progressive view that these two things are converging, right? What is happening in technology and Proptech is actually increasingly informing how a large real estate capital allocator should be deploying capital.
And to be honest with you, I've been real estate at over 30 years, and in 2018 I took kind of a sabbatical year, and so every time you stop, you start thinking, right? And I felt like there were so many changes around us, and especially in the real estate industry, that we were not tackling on. And so when I came back, I had, chief innovation officer only on my head. And it's afterwards that I took over investments, but very much wanted to keep both hats, because to me, like I said, you cannot do one without the other these days. And I think if I look at what Ivanhoe Cambridge is doing with Fifth Wall, for instance, one word that comes to mind, um, especially in these times, is the word humility. And humility and knowing what you don't know, and not be afraid to go out and seek help and seek the expertise that you do not have internally. And I think you guys at Fifth Wall, given your real estate background, given your teams and your expertise, you're bringing some very important skills and knowledge for us to better understand how technology, digital, fits and will continue to be so important in the real estate of today and tomorrow. So yeah, I think we're going to see this more and more. Both innovation and investment by definition is looking forward, right? Everything is about today about the future. It goes very well hand in hand. In both cases, you need to guess right. I often say when you invest, you basically need to guess right. And same applies to innovation. You need to guess right as to what people will start to do more and more and what they will need more and more.
And I guess, it seems to me that, the self-awareness and the thoughtfulness for a real estate company to approach technology and innovation with, as you said, humility. I mean, just as someone who talks to the real estate industry, around their innovation strategy, it's rare, right, to have that perspective. And I think there has been historically in the real estate industry this view of I can do everything myself, right? I'm in the business of designing, architecting, building, owning, operating, financing, capitalizing, building. So of course I can do venture capital as well. And obviously I've always thought of Fifth Wall as kind of being a bridge, right, between that mentality and kind of the traditional real estate capital markets and operations and what's happening in the innovation economy. Was that a natural thing for Ivanhoé to embrace, or did that kind of come organically out of your culture and your ethos, or was it something that took work to realize?
Yeah, I think it was an evolution. I think like any industry, and the infamous if it ain't broken, don't fix it. I think a lot of companies, I think the real estate industry felt like this, and then a lot of big companies, and it's true in every industry. Often a disruptor will go after something that is really, really big, and they take just a little bite. And whether you're an office landlord or you're a retail owner, you will see new trends happening, new ways of doing things, and you'll say, it's small. I mean, it won't affect me. And then eventually you start realizing that it's growing and it's working, and then you try to convince yourself that there's kind of room for everybody anyway, and you cannot attract every tenant, you cannot do everything, so there's room for the competition. And then you start to lose some of important tenants, and you start to realize that, well, maybe that disruptor is onto something. And by the time you react, sometimes it's just too late. First and foremost, you need to to acknowledge where you are, and then figure out what problem you need to solve, and who can help you. And I think that going through those steps as a company is super important. And it forces you then to stay agile. And even though you're a very large institution, you try to think a little bit like a smaller company, more agile and more dynamic. And so I very much see you guys. I think I mentioned to you before, sort of like a translator, for us, between a more technology, digital type environments that we don't know as much, and our older fashioned, conservative, traditional real estate world. That the good news is my favorite stat, I guess, is that we spend 95% of our lifetime inside, somewhere. And so if you're in real estate, it's a good stat to remember.
Yeah, and I love just obviously talking about this cultural awareness you have around this, because in some ways I think about your comment around how Ivanhoé Cambridge has like kind of embraced technology with a commensurate amount of humility for what it knows and what it doesn't know, and it is leveraging fifth wall to kind of be that intermediary, that connective tissue, that translator between the innovation economy and the traditional real estate industry. And the reason I think that's so unique is going back to like the early days of fifth wall, because what we encountered was actually a lot of, I guess, the antithesis of that, hubris, right, from large real estate owners who said, I can stand up my own corporate venture fund, I can do this all in house, this is not that hard, of course I can do this. And honestly, it has always been challenging to kind of disabuse large real estate owners that while you should do those things internally, and it's not that we're a replacement for them, trying to invest in venture capital and emerging new technologies while at the same time operating a best-in-class real estate company is really hard. And it gives you blind spots, right? It gives you blind spots that you referenced, that you know you are kind of you kind of lose sight of these new disruptive threats, right? You are the blockbuster, not seeing its Netflix coming along. You are the hotel industry, not seeing its Airbnb come along. And I guess as you think about that, when I'm just curious about your reaction when Fifth Wall approached you and we said, look, we have, you know, a variety of products that are designed specifically for real estate owners like yourselves. Obviously, you've made the single most significant commitment to Fifth Wall, and we are so appreciative of that. But you committed in a very unique way. You committed across all of our products in North American real estate tech, European real estate tech, climate tech, and a retail fund. And how did you think about that? Like, how did that map to your internal priorities as an organization?
We've been in various forms of partnerships, you know, for a long time. And I know my first reaction was to try to become an investor in everything that you were doing. Because just to pick one strategy and not the other three kind of didn't make sense. You know, I wanted to make sure that, and one of the first thing I said to you, I remember when we did meet was, well, if and when we need to call you, I want to be able to call you, you know, and I want to treat you as a partner. And so wherever you feel you have expertise now, and you've raised these four, you know, great funds, well, these are important buckets of monies that we have that are being disrupted, as I said. And so we felt like whatever you were doing through these funds would be very helpful for us. But at the basis was that, you know, we could become very good business partners and we could help each other. And I very much believe that. And yeah, it was just pretty much a year ago, right? That it was just pre-pandemic, and I'm very glad that we did that, because obviously didn't know what was coming, but we did feel like it was a very changing environment. You know, real estate had been growing for 10 straight years, for a full decade since the financial crisis. Sooner or later, music was going to stop. We never know the cause, but we kind of know that one day, you know, it needs to kind of take a break, you know. And so yeah, for us it was clear that we were interested in all four vehicles, because it would then be easier to create a true global partnerships.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things just on our side of that is, one, obviously, we have our own dose of humility. We are humbled, obviously, to have the opportunity to work with you across all of our funds. But I think to some extent what it represents and what your investment and commitment to us represents is that this collision, this secular collision between real estate and tech, which is kind of broadly encompassed as this word prop tech, it's a bit of a misnomer because the reality is it's so much more nuanced and it's so much more interconnected to other technology themes and trends. So, for example, we focus obviously in our North American fund on North American real estate technology, but honestly, a lot of those same trends, the pattern recognitions we see from that, those are applicable in Europe. Like what is happening in Europe around Europe's real estate technology ecosystem and how large European real estate owner operator developers are looking to engage with that is very analogous. But then almost orthogonally to that, it's like technology is colliding with real estate and so is sustainability. And I know you have a really unique point of view on that. So I want to go into that in a second. But then lastly, a retail fund, again, it's not really prop tech. It's really about the collision between real estate, technology, and commerce, right? And disruptions from e-commerce, disruptions in last mile logistics. And I think it's just interesting to almost step back and evaluate how broad what we now call prop tech has become. There's so many contours to this space that are interesting and nuanced. How does Ivanhoe Cambridge as an organization ingest all those insights and use it to inform your capital allocation decisions, right, as an organization?
So, as I mentioned at the beginning, we started off with the two main traditional asset classes, office and retail. And if I put hotels aside for a second, these are the two most disrupted asset classes right now and have been for several years. So we are starting from an existing portfolio of assets that have all the good traditional qualifications and criterias that you would look for, in defining what is a good real estate asset and a real estate building, whether it's location, whether it's the quality of your tenant base, whether it's the quality of the construction and the asset itself. And yet, we see that there is a shift in both of these asset classes in terms of who our client is ultimately. And traditionally, you would do a leasing transaction, kind of broker to broker. You would do a long-term transaction. You wouldn't spend too much time understanding who's going to be in your building or in your asset day in, day out, and how successful they are. How successful they are, say, in an office environment to attract and retain talent. And if you're a retail asset, who's actually going to your asset and to do what and why? And
It's interesting, just to stop you for a second there, because I think it's so, I know you've talked about this before, but it's like it turns the job of being a real estate owner operator into both developer, but also kind of sociologist and consumer behavioralist. And that's just a unique shift from where we were even 10 years ago.
it's interesting because just on a personal note, I have two grown-ups children. One is, my son is starting his real estate career, but my daughter, who's the oldest, has been a kind of social worker and helping people in need and with mental health problems, etc. And for many years, we were saying, how different, they were both, of them were in terms of, focus and what they were doing every day. But more and more now, and with the pandemic, we've been talking exactly about what you just said, from a, understanding social behavior and how people will react and what's important for someone in making a decision is turning out to be super important, in real estate. And it's not only about, having the proper credit. I'll give you an example. For many, many years, you would love to have a traditional tenant in a traditional industry that would somehow know exactly their need and requirement for office space for the next 10, 15 years. For instance, a law firm. Well, when you think about it today, maybe we would prefer to have a younger company in a growing industry that may not know exactly what their need for space will be in 5, 10 years, even 2 years. But which one would you prefer? And so that would not have been a real question several years ago. Now it's very much a question. And in fact, I would look at an office building a little bit like a retail asset, i.e., I want to have diversification and diversity in the kind of tenants in the building, because it will bring diversity in the people that are there, people that are actually in the building. And that comes and impact the amenities and services you will offer. It gives an impression that you're in a micro kind of society, within one building. And who knows, if we find a way to get closer to the tenant, instead of being a relationship of almost like a lender borrower, where rent's being paid every month and you don't get to know each other, maybe it's more of a partnership, and maybe it's closer to, hey, how can we help you in your company growth? And it's impacting a lot of how we will go after any vacant space, for instance, that we might have in a building now. Instead of hurrying up to lease it to the next long-term tenant, maybe we pause and think about another alternate use for it. Bringing flexibility for that space, in flexibility and in the contractual way that we're going to offer that space to users. Bringing it closer to hospitality, for instance. All of that, gets you into technology through the urgent need for data, urgent need to understand, who's there for what purpose, and that will then dictate what you think might be the highest and best use for a particular space. So a lot through the last few years, we've had to think more broadly about who is the ultimate end user for any space that we have, and how do we reach them, what do we offer them, and why, and how. So all the easy questions, right? And so that's where people like you come in and help us translate a little bit what some of these end users actually need and want, but maybe the communication is not easily started between a big institution like us, and maybe a younger company or a younger designer would like to do a pop-up store somewhere. I think it's, to me, it's just a matter of being connected. Being connected is more than technology and a Wi-Fi and having the right equipment. It also means being connected and grounded, and ultimately that's what real estate should be, right? You should be grounded, and you should have literally your ear on the ground, and listen and watch and observe what people actually want from your space and need from your space.
It's interesting because real estate as an industry is in many ways a lagging indicator of fundamental demographic, sociological shifts that are happening. And what you're saying is obviously so nuanced and complicated, but it's kind of like it's like the way you're looking at it is partially that technology is driving consumer behavior change, right? And that consumer behavior change is fundamentally altering the wants of how humans want to engage with space, their needs from that space, the characteristics of that space. And that in turn makes the job of allocating capital to monetize physical space, which is ultimately the real estate industry, just really complicated in the modern era. And that technology is not just an enablement tool, right, to do real estate better, faster, cheaper, easier. It's also an input into allocating. And I think that's a really important point. And I want to ask you about one aspect of that, which I know you have a very clear point of view on, which is, we've talked a lot about the real estate industry's culpability in the climate crisis. And I'm talking about the industry as a whole, right? It's responsible for about 13% of the US economy, but yet 30% of all CO2 emissions. And obviously there's a disconnect there. How does Ivanhoé Cambridge as an allocator think about integrating its view on sustainability and kind of the real estate industry accepting this mantle of responsibility around decarbonizing? How does that inform some of these decisions? Is that how does that intersect with some of what you just talked about?
Yeah, so it's so important. I mean, if I may just a second include it into the ESG, bucket, that acronym is often thrown out there as a must-have, but now it's becoming very, very important. We've been talking a lot about company culture, in the past 12 months, because the companies are wondering how they will deal with the work from home environment now, and some employees wanting to go back or not, et cetera. And it has caused, I find, a lot of very good thinking with companies as to what is the company culture, what's our purpose, what's the company vision statement, mission statement, et cetera. And I think for a company such as ours, investing public pension monies, we came to realize and decided that we would be more than just an annual return. We needed to be more than that. We need to make a difference in the communities that we invest in. And so, sustainability, climate change is something that, needs to be tackled. It needs to be tackled seriously. And I don't think we have a choice in the real estate industry to do a lot more and a lot faster and a lot, sooner. And so what we've decided to do is look at, how we invest, and with who, and to do what, and how can we do our part? How can we be more efficient with the energy that we use? And so it's through, getting additional certifications. How can we save on energy? Whatever we decide to build, we decided to start building with wood frames, for instance, in the States, in Europe, with some partners. When you decide to do a major retrofit of a building, it's basically for us recycling an existing building, which also is good for the planet. Then there's the whole notion of green financing. A lot of industry, a lot of real estate investors would say, well, it's costing money. Of course, it's good to do more for the planet, but it's impacting the returns and it's impacting the bottom line. Well, we started to have some very, very interesting financing, because our buildings, that we bring to the lender are more green. And so we end up having cheaper financing because, of, the fact that they're considered, green. I think the next thing will be the capacity to attract tenants because the building is efficient. and because it's less, polluting. And I think we're going back to basics where air quality is so important, and when you think about it, air quality, I mean, pretty basic stuff. Natural light, and just, the overall, in French we say bien-être, so, well-being. So this is very much connecting with the planet and taking care of it. And so with the numbers that you gave, I mean, I think that every real estate owner investor needs to do its part, needs to do better. And we hope that, through investments such in your fund, in your climate tech fund, and any other ways really, that it becomes a very it's automatically a condition to do any kind of investments you want. It's not a nice to have, it's a must have. And I bet you that we're at a turning point, and I think the pandemic is going to accelerate that too.
And I think that one of the exciting things that I think, for example, there has been historically this conflation in the real estate industry. I would say some of it unintentional, some of it intentional, where real estate owners really try to merge these two unique concepts. One is deployment of energy saving technology or materials, right? Which is, I own a building, I want solar panels on that building, I'm going to buy and deploy those solar panels on that building. That's not investment, that's deployment, right? That is taking technology that already exists today and putting it to work. And clearly it's a very positive thing for the world, for the environment, for tenants, for the owners, for their investors. But with that said, one of the challenges it seems like today in the real estate industry is that there's a funding shortfall in the R&D towards new technologies that can actually close what I would call the operational gap around a building's carbon footprint. So today, even with all the best technologies deployed at any given building to retrofit it, we can only get about halfway there in terms of the building's operational carbon footprint. So the question is, how are we going to get the other 50% of technology deployment ready? And I think that's an R&D question. And the real estate industry hasn't historically invested a lot in R&D. And one of the ways that obviously we've talked about this is there's kind of an opportunity to solve this collective action problem by the real estate industry coming together and saying, well, we individually don't want to invest in R&D, nor should we be. Together, we are such large allocators that this is an imminently solvable problem if we all just act together. And my hope, and obviously what I'm so thankful for, is that Ivanhoé Cambridge was really the first big allocator to raise its hand and say, we want to contribute to that. We do think it's a collective action problem, and we want to be the first to contribute to that pool of capital that's going to help the real estate industry reduce its carbon footprint to zero. And Canada has always been at the forefront of sustainability vis-a-vis the United States. Do you think that's always been in your DNA, or is that, how have you seen that articulated when you interact with, say, European real estate owner operator developers versus American and specifically US based real estate owner operator developers?
Yeah, I mean, it's you don't want to generalize. I think that certainly in Canada, if I step back a bit, I think we have Canada is a big country. It's a grand territory. When you look at a map, we're 10 times smaller in terms of population than the US. And I think we have the same coastlines and the same mountains, and we have the same farmlands and same countryside. I mean, we just somebody just decided to draw a line horizontal instead of vertical a long time ago, right? But I think that we very much have this European influence. Certainly where I'm sitting in the province of Quebec, it's still very French, influence. The rest was very, British, obviously. And if you go to Europe, you're very involved in Europe as well, on sustainability, climate change, climate tech, and just overall realization that something needs to be done. I think you would agree that Europe is ahead of North America.
I think everyone would agree with that.
And Canada is probably ahead of the US. And in fact, we hired a vice president ESG January 20, and he's now sitting in Paris, at our office in Paris. And we felt like it would be better for our company that he be exposed to everything happening in Europe, because on this side of the pond, as we say, Europe is almost treated as a country, but Europe is a multitude, dozens of countries, and everyone has its own mind and his own realities. And you could make the point that the United States, and the name says it, that it's a collection of very different states that are united, but many states are different from one another. If I look at the map behind you, then some of these states are very different. And when you talk about climate change, I would say, and I would argue certainly to say California might be different than, and I'll let you pick the state, but California is certainly ahead of most of the states, save for save the planet, climate change, and the realization that there is urgency to deal with. I think what's really difficult for everyone, and it's the same with companies, even large companies, is you don't know where to start. You don't know what you can do to really make a difference. And sometimes people hide behind that because they say, well, even if I do this, what difference will it make? Ultimately.
That's the collective action dilemma, right? That I think everyone, every industry, every country, every state inherently suffers from. I thought one thing you said was kind of interesting, especially about the dissonance between the political views and, say, the receptivity to progressive environmental causes across all these different states. But what's also interesting there is if you kind of dig down into that, historically cities have been more progressive with respect to sustainability and environmentalism. And so even if you were to pick, and we don't have to name the name of the state, but even if you were to pick the most historically red state, right, the kind of least receptive state, by our own imagination around environmental causes, and you were to look at voting, right, county by county, you would probably see a lot of red, and then you'd see like one blue dot. And the one blue dot would probably be the capital city or the largest city in that state. And then if you looked at where is most of the real estate value concentrated in that state, it's all concentrated in that same blue dot. And so there's an interesting dynamic that's afoot in the US where
Absolutely.
Real estate is concentrated in cities. The most valuable real estate in the world is in cities, and cities tend to be the most progressive. They tend to be the most environmentally conscious. And as a result, it's kind of incumbent on everyone who cares about, real estate as an industry, but the environment, to say this is not a partisan issue, right? This is a physics problem, and we're all struggling with it. And there actually are solutions. And it sounds like we're very much aligned that one of those solutions is capital, right? You have to move capital into the R&D that can help the real estate industry reduce its carbon footprint. We're obviously just so thankful to have the opportunity to work with, an organization that is really at the vanguard of this, like yourself. I
I
guess,
think that that point, Brendan, just quickly is important, and it was something that really attracted us to your climate tech fund is, and you're mentioning it that because you know no single investor or one country can fix all these problems. It's very important to then invest and try to find solutions faster and cheaper, yeah, right, for everybody to adopt afterwards. And so that's why I think the R&D is so important. You know, just look at the vaccines that we have triggered in less than a year. I mean, for COVID, right? I mean, it's because of the R&D push.
yeah, we mobilized all these resources all at once and overcame a big collective action problem that wasn't just systemic across states or countries. This was global inherently, and it's a great it's almost like it's a perfect corollary to what could happen in R&D around climate tech, right?
Exactly. And it's funny because when the planet kind of stopped, last spring, um, the planet started feeling better, right? In terms of pollution.
Right.
I think we're a bit victim of, people have always attracted people, and urbanization has been a very heavy, long time trend. Well, up to very recently, we thought it was only good that people would end up in one place, and you go where the jobs are, you go where the
Right.
schools are, you go where people are, and you think it can only be good, and values go up, and everything's fine. And then until you're told that, well, there's also some negatives and important negatives, and now we need to tackle them. That's why I think the R&D is so important, and that's what made us jump first, I guess, because we had that conviction. But you guys are going to be handling holding the driving wheel.
Well,
But at least we'll be in the car with you. So
well, we do hope to, convene the industry, and that has always kind of been like, in some ways, the root philosophy of Fifth Wall, which is that the industry is better acting as an industry than acting as a bunch of individual constituents. And it's just exciting to have, an organization like yourself that really shares that philosophy. And I guess the last thing I wanted to ask is just, clearly Ivanhoé Cambridge has arrived at, I think, this really thoughtful, really progressive, really sustainability forward view of how to manage a real estate business and allocate capital to the real estate industry. For a lot of real estate owners and operators and developers and capital allocators, it's not so easy, I think, to shift their mindset. And I guess, what counsel would you have for other large real estate owners that are reflecting on and kind of metabolizing some of these big questions about how to change their business? Like, what guidance would you give them? Just because so many people in the real estate industry watch this show and think through these questions.
yeah, I think the advice I would give is certainly it worked for us. What we did in 2019 was to say, okay, what will real estate look like 10 years from now? And we start thinking about things like company purpose and vision statement, and what are we about? What are we trying to do besides just making money? And which is very important as an investor. That's why you're there. But what else? And how are you going to attract the younger generation to come work for you? I mean, the number one question we get when we interview a young talent is, what is Ivanhoé Cambridge's opinion on ESG and on
Right.
sustainability.
This is like
And
a non-negotiable issue. It's table stakes, right?
exactly, they never ask us about our 5-year average return, never. So it's important for the next generation and the next generation. And so it kind of forced us to just, pause and think about, okay, do we want to contribute? Answer is yes. Like I was raised by an uneducated, grandpa that was a farmer turned businessman, and he used to say, if you're going to ask yourself questions, ask yourself easy questions, like obvious questions. And anybody that you're listening out there, do you think there is a problem that needs to be tackled with, climate change? Answer is yes. Do you feel you should do your part? Answer is yes. Do you think you need help figuring out what to do, how you can do it? Yeah, probably. Don't think you can do it by yourself. And so very quickly you get to realizing certain things, and then you have a smaller problem to tackle, and then ultimately I'll finish where I started. The word humility. So just realize that you don't know everything about everything. And the worst thing you can think is that you're an expert in something, because that's usually where you stop learning. So don't consider yourself an expert in everything, and go seek help where help is. And I think this is too big a topic to think that you can tackle it alone. So I hope that and there are others, we're not the first one to wake up to this, that other real estate owners really put their money where their mouth is, and contribute and do more. And I hope that tenants realize that, and choose accordingly. And same with employees and younger talents that will pick an employer also based on their deep belief, and their company culture.
Sylvain, it's always interesting to get your thoughts. I feel like obviously we've learned a lot from our real estate corporates, but actually just in the short time of working together, I feel like we've learned a tremendous amount about how real estate companies should philosophically approach some of these, big existential challenges they're facing around technology and sustainability. So I just wanted to thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you for being a part, obviously, of all of Fifth Wall's funds. We're humbled to have you. And yeah, just have really enjoyed the relationship.
Well, same here. Thank you, Brendan. I know that we're going to have a very good, successful, long relationship. So I'm happy to be sitting here with you, and looking forward to many, many other chats like that.
Great. Well, thanks, Sylvain.
Thank you.